Hello, and welcome to the audiobook of A Failure's Full Power. I will now begin reading Chapter 1. I woke up at 6 a.m. exact, like I did most days. Okay, maybe I was a few minutes off or just a little behind in getting up. But do you honestly expect me to get it right 100%? Like Jeb Bush said. Give me a break. I quickly slipped on my clothes, like I did every other morning that I got up. The clothes I chose to wear? My school uniform, of course. A blue polo shirt, some gray pants, and white tennis shoes with orange highlights on them. I always made sure not to button the polo shirt, since not doing so would allow my chest to fulfill a level of fan service for my female classmates. Sex sells. I sprayed myself with a suitable amount of cologne in order to again appease my female admirers. After getting my mandatory deodorant in, now that I was tanned, rested, and ready, like Governor Bobby Jindal during his presidential campaign, I stepped out of my bedroom, closing the door quietly. Didn't want to make my mother and brother wake up and be considered a deplorable for such crude behavior. You know, like the people that voted for Trump, according to his Democratic competitor Hillary Clinton. A super predator like me shouldn't comment on that and just pretend it didn't happen. Going into the kitchen, I turned the light on and illuminated the room with the Thomas Edison invention. I walked inside on my tippy toes and didn't make any noises or disruptions, unlike Bernie Sanders' campaign during the 2016 Democratic presidential primaries. I opened the refrigerator and smiled. What? You don't do the same when you see your milk isn't going to expire for another week? I grabbed that container of white glory and placed it on the counter, grabbing a box of my favorite cereal, Apple Jacks, from the cabinet, not to be confused with the group of individuals that are the most senior of appointments in the executive branch. With my bowl of cereal crafted, I walked back to my bedroom, shutting the door behind me, like the U.S. federal government got shut in October 2013. Just as I took the second of my bites into the Apple Jacks, the door suddenly slammed open, my brother's arm being the first thing I saw as I looked up from the cereal bowl. He was dressed in a white tank top with some black sweats. Jordan, I said, waggling my finger and with a smirk. You don't come in on adults unless you're called. But you still live in our house, he said, smirking back at me as he ran to me while I was seated and threw his arms out. We said nothing in a moment's long embrace, as I was raised to speak only when spoken to. And like I said, we were silent to begin with. He let go of me and smiled. Have a good day at school, Jordan said, closing his eyes and placing his hands behind his back. Thank you, I told him, standing up from my seat and lifting him into my arms. After we had that tender moment, my mother drove me to my high school campus, her watching me as I exit the passenger seat side of the car. I'm sorry for that error. Justin, she called my name. Me turning to look at her. Remember, getting out of high school is nothing. College will prove your true worth. I nodded my head and walked onward to the opening of the building. Going inside, I saw a whole bunch of different students. Some tall, some short, some male, some female, some wide, some thin, some even wearing their clothes outside in. I'm sure they were doing that on purpose. The one thing they all had in common, though, was like most days, none of them were saying anything to me, either because they were caught up in their own dialogues or just didn't care to try. Either way, I was standing there watching. Then I felt a hand upon my shoulder, the arm's position telling me the person was either shorter than me or crouching down. I looked back to see a familiar face, one that I smiled for. Gary, I said, thank God you're here. I was starting to get bored. I just got here, Gary said with a laugh after that. Good thing you stood right there. Saved me the trouble of having to look for you. I smiled again, having let it up as he spoke to me, and we began a small talk about our weekends. That time talking essentially evaporated any waiting I would have done twiddling my thumbs and waiting for my classes to begin. When the bell rang, the two of us said our goodbye and went to our classes. There I was able to distract myself with the material, but after 2 weeks, 2 hours had drained my brain. I was ready for lunch. The bell rang when my first class for the day was over, and I immediately started packing my things. The person sitting next to me that I knew a little too well was standing in place, wearing a green sleeveless top over her blue shirt, black pants, and brown boots. The liberal's looking a little depressed, she teased. You could say that, I said. A Democrat must have lost an election. I looked back at her. She laughed. Oh, right, it's California, she said. We're a one-party system like Cuba. Other parties are allowed to run, they just don't win. She walked with me out of class, and we went outside. Where like this morning, there were a whole bunch of students standing around talking to each other. Lazuli, I said, calling her name as she stood next to me, and I noticed everyone going on with their words. Want to talk with me? Sure, she replied. We had a small talk about the Democratic Party, though she mostly criticized it. I couldn't really refute much of what she said, so I took some solace in knowing that she was conservative and probably biased enough to not be convinced otherwise of anything pertaining to the party. Gary walked up to us, holding a bag of popcorn in his hand. Popcorn at 10 in the morning? Lazuli asked him. Yeah, Gary said, taking some of the popcorn out of the bag and throwing it in his mouth. I looked around then. Pretty much everyone was doing what we were doing, talking in a group and generally keeping to themselves. Apart from this one fellow with black hair, dressed in a white t-shirt, gray shorts, and blue shoes, he was hunched over, sitting on a bench, his left hand inserted into a backpack I surmised as his, and him looking inside of it and then looking outside and shifting his eyes around as though being in someone's sights was his greatest fear. For the next 2 minutes, as Gary and Lazuli spoke, I glanced my eyes over to him now and again until I saw some cords partially be revealed as he pulled a part of its structure from outside of his bag. I pressed my foot in his direction and then saw a familiar face walk up to him. What the hell are you doing? Sir Linky, a classmate of mine, asked. Don't worry about it, the guy said. Mind your business and get out of here. I'm at school because I'm a student. Where else am I supposed to go? To class. Class is out. Sir Linky grabbed the bag from the guy who stood up and pushed Sir Linky back. The latter still holding on to the bag as he fell backward. Some of the guys, or rather students, took notice, stopping their conversations, including Gary and Lazuli. What's going on? Lazuli asked. Let's find out, Gary said, running to right behind Sir Linky. Adam, are you okay? Sir Linky, recognizing the sound of his first name, turned back. What are you getting mixed up in this for? Sir Linky asked. You look like you were having some trouble, Gary said. Don't believe everything you see. Adam threw his fist up and stared at the guy, who got out of the seat after we had sat back down and began breathing hard. Lazuli and myself walked over to the three. All of you just stay out of it, the still unnamed guy said. I can dig in my bag if I want. Not if you've got some cords sticking out randomly, Sir Linky said. For all we know, you could be packing. Lazuli stepped forward to the guy. How about you just take the stuff out and let us see what's inside, Lazuli asked him. He nodded his head. Lazuli backed up by a few inches, standing between me and Sir Linky, Gary being just behind Lazuli. The guy pulled out a few things from his backpack, including some paper and a book. Sir Linky stomping his foot against the ground. Hurry up and pour it out, Sir Linky said. Ain't nobody got time for that slow, suspicious shit. The guy turned around. Then I'm going to kick rocks, he said, running a few inches before Gary grabbed him by the arm. You can't get away from the fastest guy around, Gary said with a laugh. I'd give Flash a run for his money. Barry Allen or Wally West, I asked him. Yes. Sir Linky moved past me to stand in front of the guy. Who are you anyway? I asked the guy. The guy smirked. Wouldn't you like to know, he said. I'm not planning on telling you. Lazuli reached into the guy's pocket, revealing herself to have grabbed the wallet as she jumped a few feet away from the guy, who Gary grabbed the other arm of while he was reacting to her. Hey, Gary yelled out. That's pickpocketing. Bite me, Lazuli replied, looking into the wallet as Gary came closer to her. What are you doing? I've been exposed to a couple of fetishes and I couldn't tell if you were serious. He stopped moving closer to her. Lazuli removed the card from the wallet, holding it in her hand and turning this to where she could see whatever was written on there. Dowdy Statham, Lazuli read on the card, flipping it over to us. and me seeing the picture next to the name was that of the guy that had a liking of putting his hand in his backpack. "So that's who you are," she said that looking at him, and he stared back at her with the most exposed looking face ever. "You weren't supposed to learn who I was," Dowdy said, struggling to get Gary off of him. "Not until you died." "What the hell are you talking about, you nut?" Sirlinky asked. "Don't worry about it. You'll find out at the right time." I looked around again, seeing a big chunk of students looking at us with relatively wondrous eyes. "Turn away," Gary said, "lest I reveal my Medusa-like powers and turn you all to stone with mere eye contact." Some of them laughed. Some continued with silence. They all remained focused on the situation, however. Apparently I was the only one worried, since Lazuli, Gary, Sirlinky, and Mr. Loves digging in his backpack were having a dialogue as my back was turned. Finally, an adult emerged from the crowd of onlookers, a man with the profession of teacher, and one I had seen in the class of since first coming to the school in September. He was of Hispanic and Japanese descent, wearing a light blue polo shirt, some khaki pants, a gray jacket, and black tennis shoes. "What's going on here?" he asked. "Mr. Montoya," I called at his name. "We caught this student messing around his backpack, and he wouldn't show us what it was." "Who's he?" "Who's we, rather. I'm sorry, I'm messing up again." "Well, Adam saw him first, then Gary jumped in, and then Lazuli and me came over." Mr. Montoya looked at Dowdy. "Let's see what's in your bag," Mr. Montoya told him, Dowdy sighing. "Lighten up. If nothing's in there, then everyone here will be proven to have been worrying for nothing." Dowdy threw his head down, and Gary was still holding on to him. "Time to go," Lazuli said. Gary promptly took his hands off. Dowdy breathed another sigh, and with his head as low as a person that was confirmed to have come in second place in the lottery, he grabbed his bag from the ground and emptied it. My heart beat fast, like something about the reveal was preemptive of a warning sign.